My boss called me into his office saying, "I'll train this new employee within 1 month." Then, he spoke to our CEO in French saying, "Teach once she's trained, we'll fire her." What he didn't know was that I understood French. I nodded calmly, "Okay." A month later, when he handed me the termination letter, I had a surprise for them too, termination letter. I sat across from Jason Whitmore in his sleek, over-polished office, the kind that tried too hard to scream power. He leaned back in his leather chair, a smug smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, as if he had been rehearsing this moment for weeks. "We're restructuring," he said, voice smooth like he was doing me a favor. "Unfortunately, your role won't exist after the end of next month." I kept my face neutral, nodding once. "I see." He smiled wider, mistaking my composure for surrender. "But before you go," he added, lacing his fingers over his chest, "you'll need to train your replacement. She starts tomorrow, Madison Blake. I'm sure you'll be professional about it." Madison. Of course. She came from one of our biggest competitors on paper, a power move. In reality, a disaster waiting to happen. But Jason didn't know that yet. He also didn't know that the company he was so confidently mismanaging didn't belong to him anymore. "My name is Elise Carter," I should have said out loud, but instead I smiled politely. "Of course. I'll make sure she learns everything she needs to know." He gave me a little nod, completely unaware that the person he thought he was firing had, 3 months ago, quietly purchased controlling interest in the company through a holding firm he had never heard of, EC Holdings. He never even thought to ask what the E and C stood for. Elise Catherine Carter. I walked out of his office without a word, heels clicking against the cold tile floor, but inside, I was burning. Not with anger, with clarity. I had worked here for 12 years. Started as an associate nobody noticed, worked late nights nobody thanked me for, built campaigns that won awards Jason claimed credit for. But I had been paying attention all this time. More than that, I had been preparing. The real story started years ago, long before Jason took over, when his father Charles Whitmore ran this place with vision and fairness. Charles had seen something in me back when I was just a quiet strategist with too many ideas and not enough confidence. He taught me how to turn both into power. He believed in potential. Jason believed in appearances, and now he thought he was getting rid of me. As I reached my office, I passed the framed photo of Charles and me from the company's 20th anniversary. He had given me my first leadership role. That day, he told me, "Success is not a title, Elise. It's what you do when no one sees you working." Well, no one had seen me buying up shares. No one had seen me build EC Holdings. No one had seen the hours I spent with lawyers and financial advisors quietly, carefully becoming the real owner of Whitmore Strategies. Jason thought he was in control, but tomorrow morning the board would meet, and he would learn the truth. I wasn't being dismissed. I was just getting started. As I walked back to my office, the other hallway felt distant, muffled under the weight of everything I had held in for years. I kept my expression steady, nodding politely to the junior associates who still thought I was just the head of marketing, just another employee being pushed out by Jason Whitmore. 12 years ago, when I first stepped into Whitmore Strategies, I was a fresh hire, Elise Carter, marketing associate, eager and invisible. Back then, the company was run by Jason's father, Charles Whitmore. He was stern but fair, a man who believed success was built, not inherited. He noticed what others didn't, including me. He challenged me early, throwing complex projects my way and expecting me to swim. I did. I worked harder than anyone, staying long after others left, learning every piece of this business, sales funnels, client behavior, product development, investor psychology. Charles pushed me, but he also protected me. He saw talent, not gender, value, not title. When he promoted me to director, he pulled me aside and said, "You've got something most people never figure out, quiet strength. Don't let anyone talk you out of it." I never forgot that. But 3 years ago, Charles died suddenly. A stroke. No warning. Just gone. Jason took over within a week. And from the moment he sat in his father's chair, the company started to rot. The mission shifted. No more collaboration, no more mentorship, no more integrity. He filled leadership with frat house friends and smooth talkers. People who could charm investors at dinner but couldn't read a market trend to save their lives. I watched talented employees pushed out, innovation stifled, ideas stolen, culture suffocated. Everything Charles had built, everything I had helped grow, was being gutted. I could have left. I almost did. But one night, I stayed late, staring at the framed photo of Charles on my shelf, and something in me snapped. I didn't want a new job. I wanted my company back. So I started small. I opened a private account, bought a few shares. Quietly, patiently. At first it was just a way to feel like I still had some control. But then I noticed something. Other investors were pulling out. The stock was sliding under Jason's leadership. The market was watching. That's when I created EC Holdings. It started as a shell, nothing more than initials on a piece of paper. But behind it was a strategy. I diversified, used smaller investment firms to avoid attention, kept every acquisition under the radar, just below the threshold that would trigger alarms. And I waited. I studied legal loopholes. I mapped out ownership percentages. I stayed quiet as Jason strutted around like he was untouchable, barking orders, firing brilliance, and hiring mediocrity. And then 3 months ago, the opportunity came. A major institutional investor decided to offload their entire stake. They'd lost faith. I didn't. With the help of my lawyer, I moved fast. We made the purchase through a web of timed transactions. By the end of it, EC Holdings owned 51% of Whitmore Strategies. No one saw it coming, least of all Jason. And now he thought he had fired me. I arrived early the next morning just like I always did. The office was still quiet, the kind of silence that hums with potential. I passed the receptionist, who looked up and whispered, "She's already here." Of course she was. Madison Blake stood in the lobby, all sharp angles and designer confidence, scrolling through her phone like she owned the place. Her suit was crisp, expensive, but too flashy corporate theater more than leadership. She looked up and smiled in that rehearsed, dismissive way people use when they think they've already won. Elise Carter, I said warmly, extending my hand. Welcome to Whitmore Strategies. She shook it without much interest, her eyes already scanning the office behind me. Thanks, Jason's told me all about the changes coming. It's exciting. Exciting. Right. Well, I said, turning toward my office. Let's get started. I'll be walking you through our current campaigns and client strategies. I could practically hear her heels clicking out their own drumbeat of ego behind me. Once inside, I pulled up a few key projects, ones I knew backward, ones I had built from scratch. As I explained our client retention strategies, she cut me off with a smirk. These are a little dated, don't you think? In my experience, acquisition is far more aggressive and effective. Retention's nice, but it's not where the power is. I tilted my head slightly, as if considering her input. Aggressive acquisition works, sure, until your churn rate spikes and no one trusts your brand. She waved her hand dismissively, like I just recited a bedtime story. We'll be repositioning that whole angle. Jason wants something bolder. Jason wants. Jason knows. Jason plans. I nodded slowly, as if I hadn't already planned to have him out of this building by noon. For the next 2 hours, I let her talk. Let her show me exactly how unprepared she was. Her suggestions were shallow, rooted in buzzwords, not results. She misunderstood our clients, underestimated our audience, and had no idea how fragile the company's foundation really was. She thought she was here to replace me. At 10:03 a.m., my phone buzzed. James Chung. Papers filed. Board meeting set for 11. I stared at the message for a moment, let the weight of it settle, then slipped the phone into my drawer. Madison, I said, standing. I'm afraid we'll have to pause for now. There's an emergency board meeting I need to attend. She blinked, caught off guard. Jason didn't mention anything to me. I smiled politely. I don't suppose he did. Without another word, I walked out of my office and headed for the conference room, heart steady, steps calm. This was the calm before the storm, the quiet stretch of air just before the lightning strike. She thought she was being trained for my job. She had no idea she was just part of the countdown. When I walked into the boardroom, Jason was already there, red-faced and pacing, his phone pressed hard to his ear. What do you mean, emergency board meeting? He barked. I didn't authorize anything. I'm the CEO. He looked up and froze when he saw me. Elise, what the hell are you doing here? This meeting is for executives only. I walked calmly to the head of the table and sat down. I know. That's why I'm here. Before he could react, the board members began filing in. Some curious, others cautious. Most of them had been pushed to the margins since Jason took over. They hadn't had a real voice in years. But today would be different. James Chen entered last, a leather folder tucked under his arm. He met my eyes, gave a subtle nod, and took his seat. Jason was still fuming. You can't just walk in here and I didn't. I interrupted, voice calm. I called this meeting as majority shareholder. The room fell silent. Jason looked around, waiting for someone to laugh, to back him up. No one did. James opened his folder and began handing out documents. 3 months ago, I said, standing, EC Holdings began acquiring shares of Whitmore Strategies. As of this morning, the final transaction was completed. The company is now under new ownership. Jason's mouth opened and closed, his brain trying to catch up. EC Holdings, he repeated. That's a third-party firm. That's not it is, I said evenly. EC, Elise Catherine. He staggered a step back, as if the name physically struck him. That's not possible. You're just a marketing director? I finished for him. Just someone you dismissed without a second thought? You were too busy playing CEO to notice the floor shifting beneath you. James cleared his throat. Every transaction has been filed and verified with the SEC. Miss Carter now holds 51% of the company's shares. Jason turned pale. You think you can just take this from me? No, I said. I didn't take it. I earned it. You inherited something you never understood, and then you tore it apart. I reached into my bag and pulled out a framed photo, Charles Whitmore and me, standing side by side at the company's 20th anniversary. I placed it at the center of the table. He built this place with vision, with integrity. I was proud to stand beside him. And I won't let his legacy rot under your ego. Jason lunged forward, slamming his hand on the table. I built this company back from nothing. I gave it edge. I made it aggressive. You made it hollow, I said, walking eyes with him. And now, it's time for leadership to return to someone who actually cares about what we're building. Janet Liu, one of the longest-serving board members, stood up. I move to vote on new leadership. I second, came another voice. Within minutes, the vote was unanimous. Jason Whitmore was no longer CEO. Security was called. He screamed about lawsuits, about betrayal. But I just stood there, watching the future take shape. Jason didn't go quietly. Security stepped in as he shouted across the boardroom, his face twisted with rage. You won't get away with this, Elise. This is a hostile takeover. I'll have you in court. James remained composed, arms crossed. You're welcome to try, but everything is legally airtight. I've made sure of it. I watched as Jason was escorted from the building that had once belonged to his father, a man of vision, dignity, and principle. Jason had inherited the office, but never the values. As the elevator doors closed behind him, the silence that followed felt like a weight lifted from the entire company. Later that afternoon, Madison knocked on my office door, her smile much smaller than yesterday. Do you have a moment? Of course, I said, motioning her in. She sat across from me, visibly uncomfortable. I've had a chance to think about things. I know Jason brought me in for a certain direction. And with the changes happening, I believe it's best I explore other opportunities. I nodded. I agree. This role requires more than buzzwords and bravado. It requires someone who understands people, not just numbers. She gave a curt nod and left without further protest. When she was gone, Maya stepped in with a stack of personnel files in her arms. She shut the door behind her and grinned. So, you really did it. We did it, I corrected, taking the files from her and setting them on the desk. Now we clean house. We spent the rest of the day and late into the evening combing through every department. We weren't looking for people with perfect resumes. We were looking for people who had been overlooked, ignored, and underutilized. Look at this, Maya said, sliding a file toward me. Nathaniel Rhodes? Been here 8 years, oversaw 2 of our most successful campaigns, and hasn't had a promotion in 4 years. Why? I asked. Jason thought he was too soft. Said, he didn't have the killer instinct. I shook my head. Set up a meeting with him. We need more thinkers, not screamers. Another name stood out, Tasha Lin, a junior developer whose work had quietly driven 3 of our biggest platform improvements. No one ever mentioned her in meetings, but her code spoke volumes. We kept digging, and with each discovery, I felt something shift. This wasn't about revenge. This was about rebuilding. By the end of the week, the mood across the office had changed. People were no longer walking on eggshells. There was laughter in break rooms, conversations in hallways, ideas scribbled on white bars again. We reinstated Charles's mentorship program, revived the innovation lab Jason had shut down, started scheduling town halls with real conversations, not rehearsed presentations. In small, steady steps, the soul of the company was returning. I stood by the window that evening, watching the city lights flicker to life, and breathed deeply for the first time in years. We weren't done yet, but for the first time in a long time, we were finally moving in the right direction. The next few months were the most exhausting and the most fulfilling of my entire career. We started with the basics. The mentorship program Charles had once cherished was the first to return. Employees who had been overlooked were now guiding new talent, building relationships that didn't just strengthen the work, but the people behind it. For the first time in years, younger staff weren't afraid to ask questions. Veterans didn't feel invisible. There was laughter in the training rooms again, and collaboration replaced fear. We reopened the innovation lab, dusty and in use since Jason shut it down to cut costs. Within weeks, it was buzzing literally. One team prototyped a software tool that streamlined internal communication. Another started developing a product that would later catch the attention of one of our biggest former clients. The office itself began to change. It was subtle at first, an intern decorating her desk with plants, someone bringing in a radio playing soft music near the coffee bar. But slowly, the air shifted. The tension that had settled into every corner under Jason's reign began to lift. Our old clients started coming back, quiet emails at first, then scheduled calls. They had noticed the change, they said. Something about the energy, the leadership. They believed in us again. One even told me, it finally feels like Whitmore Strategies again. The one Charles built. Jason, meanwhile, did everything he could to undermine us. He reached out to industry contacts, whispered stories about instability, called our leadership unprepared and reckless. But the numbers told a different story. Our first quarter under new leadership ended with a 12% increase in profit. By the second, we had gained 3 new clients, and re-signed 2 that had walked away under Jason's management. Employee satisfaction surveys came back overwhelmingly positive. Words like hopeful, valued, and finally heard kept repeating. At all hands meetings, I started recognizing faces again, not just names on reports. People were engaged, asking questions, offering ideas. Some approached me in the halls just to say thank you. Others didn't say anything, but their eyes told me everything: relief, gratitude, possibility. One afternoon, Maya brought me a letter from a junior analyst who had been promoted. She had written, "This is the first time in my career I don't feel invisible." I read it 3 times before placing it in the drawer beside Charles's photo. There was still work to do, dead weight to clear, systems to streamline, voices to uplift, but we were no longer surviving. We were building again. Late one evening, as the office quieted around me, I walked the floor. Lights still glowed from conference rooms where teams stayed late by choice, white bars filled with ideas and sticky notes. People weren't here because they had to be, they wanted to be, and I realized this wasn't just a comeback. It was a return to purpose, to what Charles had started, to what I had fought for, and to what we all now believed in again. 1 year to the day since the takeover, I stood on the stage of our town hall, looking out over a sea of faces, some new, some familiar, all part of something we had built together. The auditorium buzzed with quiet anticipation, but beneath the noise was something deeper. Gratitude, belonging, hope. I took a breath, steadying myself as the lights dimmed slightly and the screen behind me lit up with the company's new logo, cleaner, bolder, and backed by a team that finally believed in it again. Exactly 1 year ago, I began. I stood in this building as our company faced a moment of reckoning. Some of you remember what it felt like back then. Uncertainty, tension, the weight of voices that had been silenced for too long. Heads nodded. A few employees smiled quietly. Others leaned in. I never wanted to lead out of revenge, I continued. I didn't step into this role to prove a point or take a throne. I stepped up because I believed, deeply, that what we had here was worth saving, worth fighting for, and I wasn't alone in that. Applause broke out across the room, but I lifted a hand gently, and it quieted. Leadership isn't inherited, it's earned, and legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you build while you're still here. I paused, pulling a remote from my pocket and clicking to the next slide, a photograph of Charles Whitmore at the company's 20th anniversary, standing beside me in the old office. This company was founded on values that went deeper than profit. Charles believed in innovation with integrity, in investing in people, not just products. He once told me, "Success isn't just about money. It's about building something that matters." That line has never left me. A murmur of recognition passed through the room. Everyone had seen that quote now. It hung in the hallway outside my office, freshly framed, its meaning more alive than ever. That's why today, I said, my voice softening, I'm proud to announce our newest initiative, the Whitmore Fellowship. Each year, we'll be partnering with local schools to provide scholarships, mentorship, and hands-on training for students pursuing careers in STEM. This isn't just outreach. It's our responsibility, our opportunity to build more than business, to build people. The room erupted in applause, genuine, heartfelt, thunderous. Maya was standing off to the side, mist in her eyes, clapping harder than anyone. I caught her gaze and smiled. We had done this together. After the meeting, I returned to my office, still holding the speech notes I hadn't even looked at. Everything I needed to say had already been inside me. The kind of truth you don't write, you live. As I sat down, a notification popped up on my screen. One new message. From Margaret Whitmore. Thank you. I clicked it open, and for a long time, just stared at her words. Dear Elise, I've been following the changes you've made this past year, quietly from afar. At first, I didn't know what to think. Charles built that company with so much of his heart. Losing him, and then watching what came after, it nearly broke me. But watching you step in, not for vengeance but for vision, I can't describe how grateful I am. He always believed in you. Always. And now I see why. Thank you for saving what he built, and for making it even better. With deep respect, Margaret. Tears welled up, and I didn't fight them. For the first time since that long, quiet takeover, I allowed myself to truly feel the weight of what we'd done. Not just removing a failing leader, but restoring a legacy. Rebuilding a home for thinkers, dreamers, and doers. This wasn't about beating Jason. It never really was. It was about standing up for something that mattered. For the people who had been silenced. For the innovation that had been buried. For the quiet voices in the back of every room, waiting to be heard. I stood and walked toward the hallway outside my office. The building had changed, paint fresher, the energy warmer, the culture alive again, but that wall stayed untouched, except for one new addition. There it was. Success isn't just about money, it's about building something that matters. Charles Whitmore. I reached out, fingers brushing against the edge of the frame, and whispered, "We did it, Charles." Behind me, I heard laughter. A marketing team walking to their next brainstorm. A junior associate from IT, sharing a joke with someone from finance. Across the room, someone had left a plate of cookies in the break room with a sticky note that simply read, "Take one, you earned it." The office was alive again, and so was the purpose behind it. I didn't get revenge. I built something better.